I'm Mick Garris, and I wrote and directed the episode Valerie on the Stairs for Masters of Horror Season 2. This was taken from an original treatment that Clive Barker wrote for us and for me to do, an idea that had been percolating in his head for a while. And his treatment that he wrote for us was 45 single-spaced pages long, and the finished screenplay for these is about 60 pages. So had I adapted faithfully that treatment that Clive had written, this would have been an $80 million picture, and we'd still be shooting it today. So a lot of judicious editorial approaches had to be made, and fortunately Clive, who has been a friend for many years, gave me carte blanche to do whatever I wanted with the story. But there was so much great stuff. It's very faithful to the story in general, but it loses a lot of giant effects scenes and things that we could never have dreamed of doing for this rather low-budget little show that we do here. It's all about imagination. And, this quote from Elizabeth Bronfen at the beginning was always a part of Clive's treatment from the very beginning as well. And it's about writers, and it's about reality and dreams and the power of the imagination. That's how Clive always put it. And usually my composer is a fellow named Nicholas Pike. He's done almost everything I've done since we first worked together in 1988 on the timeless classic Critters 2. But Nicholas had taken on a feature film, and so I called Richard Band immediately because he had done such a great job last year on Stuart Gordon's show. And Richard and I worked together for the first time on this, and I love the lushness and the mysterious, ethereal quality of the music that he brought into it. There's always kind of a dreadful undertone to the elements that he brings into it.
Hello.
So the casting process was interesting for this. Normally we have the budget to bring 2 American actors up to Vancouver, where we shoot the show, and the rest of them are all Canadian actors. In this case, we had 3 American actors with Christopher Lloyd and Claire Grant and Tony Todd. So normally our leading roles go to American actors, but Tyrone Letzo here is a Canadian-based actor. He's a guy who had read for Bryan Singer for Superman Returns. He had read for Sam Raimi to play Spider-Man. He's done a lot of film and television work. And he came in and had a really great quality that I thought would really help play this character whose life is much less of a lived life than you expect it to be once you've seen the story. And he did a great job of filling in the blanks on that. Last year, the film that I did called Chocolate was based on a short story of my own. And Chocolate, with this series, we try to really expand the range of what horror is. We want a very wide definition of horror. We don't want to do just teenagers in jeopardy being slashed by a maniac. And a lot of Blood and Guts horror fans hated the fact that Chocolate was not necessarily horrific enough. There were no monsters, there was some blood and all, but it didn't seem to go as far into what they like to call horror. So in this case, again, it's sort of an internal story made external, but wanted to take some of the horror tropes, some of the Clive Barker world, and bring it to life as well in what's hopefully a fairly adult, intelligent horror story being brought to the screen. A lot of the stuff I've done recently has been more internal, from literary sources being made external, like Riding the Bullet, like Chocolate, and now like this. It's always interesting when you're working from someone else's material because of the responsibility you feel as an artist, as a technician, to fulfill what they have and yet try and bring some of yourself into it and make it as complete and as personal as
How many
possible.
books have you written?
So originally, Clive had said, yeah, I've got a story for you, and I kept waiting and waiting and never got it from him. And in the meantime, while we were ramping up to do season 2, I had written a script called The V Word that I thought if Clive doesn't make it happen, if he's not able to bring it to us in time, then I'll probably do The V Word. And then Clive gave me this wonderful story.
Sign here.
So this is a very interesting combination of location and stage work.
Published if it's the last thing I do.
Careful.
The whole of Chocolate was shot on locations. We didn't shoot on our stage at all, whereas this, 7 out of the 10 days, well, it ended up being 8 out of 11 days, were shot on a stage. This is a location we're looking at here. It's a hotel in downtown Vancouver, in Gastown. That is, it's people on their way back up. They've had drug problems or various social problems, and they're living. It's better than a halfway house, and it's a nice place for people like this who are really working to bring themselves up by their own bootstraps. It's not an elegant place, but we wanted a place that had a sense of history and darkness and dread, and so much of what we shot in this location was rebuilt. This is the soundstage. You would never be able to know without me telling you which is soundstage and which is the location, because the production designer, David Fisher, did such a brilliant job. It was our most expensive sets, which normally, well, last year, like I said, it was all on location, and we didn't spend a lot of money on sets at all on Chocolate. And this story really required a lot of construction. This is part of the stage as well. And a lot of this story is really all about dread and anticipation. So I tried to use the real full surround mix. This is a 5.1 surround, and the idea that there are things within Heiberger House, something that there are sounds that come from every direction. We use all 5.1 of those channels to try and bring Heiberger House alive as a character on its own, and bring Tyrone. His character is sort of a blank slate, and we fill in his history with those little Super 8mm flashbacks, the silent, quick cuts of what his life before was. And then we start to bring in something mysterious and a little bit of tension here. So photographically, this is a little bit different too. I wanted to try something different. Last year, Attila Chalet shot Chocolate, and our other director of photography, our other regular alternating director of photography, John Joffin, shot this one. And what I wanted to do here was just do completely wide lenses and long lenses, and not much in the middle, and have very earth tone colors, primary colors that will jump out and scream out when they're required, but mostly very much the tones of the earth. They're the greens and the browns and tans, and those things are all colors, much of which were already in the location, and wanted to build into this. There's a sense of movement that I always wanted as well, just a feeling that there is something behind or living within any shadow that you can see, and the shadows themselves occasionally come to life and move, but the sense of something watching, like in this shot here, just slowly moving along behind him, and now we're leading him in a really wide lens as he's listening to the sounds which are coming from all around. But it's probably one of our physically darkest shows of all, if not the darkest. And I told John, let's just be bold. Let's go dark and don't be afraid of it. So movies about writing can be very dull. And, again, it's hard to take the internal and externalize it. But this is also showing what's going on within him, and trying to take the writing process and make it something more than just typing on a keyboard, and try and bring that to life.
Who is it?
I'm trying to build a ghost story here, because it turns out to be something other than that. It is a partial ghost story, and I want it to feel almost like a traditional ghost story because of where it ends up going, which is in a very poetic direction that Clive had created. Valerie, the girl in the mirror, the girl on the stairs, who you'll see plenty of, is a Los Angeles-based actress. She comes from Memphis, and her name is Claire Grant. And that was an extremely difficult role to cast. We tried a lot of women in Vancouver, and first of all, you have to appear shamelessly naked. And originally the script was written so that she was naked in every scene. The treatment was written that way by Clive, and in following that pattern, I had written it the same way. Until our casting directors came and said, you know, you probably get a much higher quality of actress if she's not naked in every scene. Whoa. Which made a lot of sense to me. And I think dramatically it works a lot better too, if that you're not constantly leering at her exposed body parts every time she's on the screen, and you're allowed to be drawn into the story. And then the nudity has that much more impact as far as her physical vulnerability goes in her link to Othakai, the beast you meet later on in the story. But this imagination, it's always happening to him. I never want it to seem like a dream except when it is briefly a dream. I'm fairly sick and tired of most dream sequences and waking up and sitting up from a bed and go, yikes, and oh, it was all a dream. But in the case of a writer dreams awake. And so, yes, there is a jolt out of a dream that's intended as a brief mind fuck. But it's not central to this. But the cries of Valerie that call him around, you know, I just wanted to convey, again, with the wide lens and that revolving lens as he's walking up the stairs and the like, that he's coming up into something. We're always bringing him towards us. And here's the first time we really see Valerie. We meet her with him, and she's as mysterious to us as she is to him. And so, again, we're always leading him up and bringing him closer. And just a simple little soft cut, a 4-frame dissolve, takes us into that wall. So it just is a sudden jolt that is as jolting to us, I hope, as it is to him.
What?
Now, the gentleman here, Edward Neely, played by Christopher Lloyd, Chris and I had worked together several years ago in another Clive Barker and Stephen King adaptation I had done called Quicksilver Highway. It was a television movie that was a pilot that no one knew was a pilot, even at the Fox network whom we made it for.
Well, you owe me, Hennessy.
Chris is a very quiet, very gentlemanly man. He never curses. He's very well read. He's extremely intelligent, and not at all the Doc Brown character that you expect. He's very, very shy. And I haven't seen much of him since we did Quicksilver Highway together. But I was really excited about having him back because this is so much different. I mean, he has the occasional explosion, but this is one of the quietest performances he gives. It's a little bit different from Doc Brown in the Back to the Future movies and the like. And he just brings something very uniquely Christopher Lloydian to this. There's nobody like Chris Lloyd, and I think he's terrific.
Nobody gives you any shit from
Jonathan Watton here,
I'll set him straight.
who we're looking at now, he's also a Canadian actor. He had just moved to Vancouver from Toronto when we booked him to do this. And originally, his character was written as an aging hippie. You know, a guy in his late 40s rather than a guy in his early 30s with a long gray ponytail and all of that. And so I had talked to my friend Howard Kalin, who was lead singer in the Turtles, the guy who sang Happy Together. He has a small part in my film of Riding the Bullet. And unfortunately, the Turtles were on tour at the time. And so we were reading all these actors of a certain age to play that part. And Jonathan came, a tape came from his agent in Toronto. And thought, you know, we don't have to make him that age, because Jonathan has his own very exciting kind of comedic, dramatic style. And he came in and blew us away, and we gambled on him without even getting the chance to meet him. and talked to him on the phone and brought him in to do it. Those little flashes of memory from Tyrone's character are shot with the same little handheld 8mm camera that we used for the opening titles in Riding the Bullet. I shot those myself because the titles in Riding the Bullet because I wanted them to look shitty and unprofessional. And I'm really good at shitty, unprofessional photography. And when we went out and rented the Super 8 camera to do the scenes here, it just coincidentally turned out to be the same camera we'd used there. This time I had the director of photography run the camera instead of myself. This year, as well as last year, my editor was Andrew Cohen, who I'd met through Tobe Hooper. He's done several films for Tobe, as well as both of Tobe's Masters films. And I was committed to putting more of the sort of horror jumps into this. And by all means trying to avoid the cat jumping out of the wastebasket, cheap jumps, but trying to do the build-up. And it comes from surprise and anticipation. I mean, it's really funny the difference that just a couple of frames will make, but the use of silence and the buildup of silence and going wide and going tight, the feeling of where to make the jolt is so flexible and so hard to judge on your own. And because these are made for television and not theatrical, you don't really get the opportunity to test it on an audience. So you just have to try it out with the other guys in the cutting room, some of the other filmmakers. The cutting room for Masters of Horror was really great because it's 3 editing suites with a common room in between them. And so often there will be 3 filmmakers working at the same time, and you'll say to John Landis, "John, come in here and look at this, and what do you think of this sequence?" And John will say, "You know, it'd be better if you do this." Or you bring Stuart Gordon in and say, "Look at this, what do you think? Hey, this is great, what if you did this?" So there's this great feeling of camaraderie that goes on there. And so building things like this, you know, the woman appearing in the mirror the first time, the beast reaching out from the shadows and pulling her into blackness, the creeping along the wall before the big thump, you know, trying to create those jump moments that are the bread and butter of horror films. It's a very flexible field that you're playing on. And Andrew Cohen is really great at helping build those things as well. But there's a lot of trial and error and a lot of interesting tests and things that go on. But you really have to kind of work from intuition that normally plays best.
I can't waste a drop. I'm saving it all for the book.
So again, Jonathan Watton here was somebody, I just really wanted a motor mouth kind of stoner guy who is all about himself, and he's all output and not a whole lot of input. But you also want to get the feeling that all of these people living within this house, I mean, some of the inspiration was Roman Polanski's The Tenant, the idea of all these eccentric people living within a home who seem comfortable with one another, but the newcomer feels like such a fish out of water, or just the sore thumb inside Heiberger House. And I just want to make him as uncomfortable as possible. And all of these people keep watching him, and we find out much later on why they have so much interest in him. And I hope you've watched this before without listening to the commentary, but if you haven't, then this is a spoiler, is that these writers who are paying such close attention to him created him as writers. And so naturally they're fascinated to see the creation that has come to life that they're responsible for. It's their astonishment as well as their amusement and fascination. But it's a very intimidating feeling to be under that magnifying lens from everyone else who lives in this quirky house that they've found.
Besides, it's not as if you're seeing ghosts.
And of course, this room was redressed to play Tyrone's room as well. When you're adapting someone else's story, again, there's a feeling of responsibility about it. But when you're writing the screenplay and you're going to direct it yourself, It's incredibly freeing because there's nobody I have to worry about except myself. You know, I feel free to cut and change and tinker with dialogue and sequences. There were a lot of things done. This was a very ambitious film, and as you can see from this scene here, that it was hard to fit all of this into 10 days of production. And in fact, it did overflow a little bit. But in this scene, one of the things we did here that you'll notice throughout is we played with the light in a very theatrical sense. I mean, we turned the light very red, very passionate intentionally, and we kept the first appearance of Othakai here very much in the dark and very silhouette-y, and just seeing the highlights of him as he goes in and grabs her. But the light changes during the course of the scene. You see it become red hot. It heats up. We actually are turning the level of the lights up as well as changing the color on during the scene practically, and not as a post-production effect. And then we cut out of that red hot passion, and he's covered in sweat, but back in the blue light, the contrasting amber and blue light that are intended to imply the coolness of intellect and the heat of passion. You know, the light from the screen of the computer on him is very blue, very cold, and very real world and sort of water on the fire, whereas the warm light from the lamps is all amber and passionate and more about life than about technology. Another reason that it's set in such an old, funky building as well, aside from the fact that it's got decades and decades of writers' blood, sweat, and tears deep within its walls. So there were definitely things that we couldn't use from Clive's treatment. I mean, there were big effect scenes and all kinds of things that happened, but there were things in the script that I cut some of them out during the pre-production time just because it seemed much too big. But we actually had to cut scenes out while I was shooting. There were a couple of scenes, and I'll point them out as they come up, where we're actually in production and going, this isn't going to work. I just have to pull it right out. So the pre-production process, going from the first script to the shooting script, is something that is also very malleable. It changes quite a bit.
Getting acclimated first.
This is my least favorite scene in the film. You need it because it bridges two scenes where he's in the bedroom and writing and waking up from writing from his dreams and the like. And you need to see the three writers who created the mysterious novel that we discover later, very interested in Rob and who he is and what he's writing and what he's all about. These are the three writers who've created Rob Hannessy. And so this scene is basically all about them watching him and finding out who he is and inspecting their handiwork. But on its own terms, it's such a dull scene. It was very difficult to teach Suki how to do the jack-off gesture as well. You know, the international symbol of masturbation, in this case literary masturbation, is something that men have down perfectly. But Suki had trouble getting the natural elbow out, wrist up and down quality of the jack-off. And then, of course, this was a last-minute addition, the right good, right well. After all, he is a man of letters, for better or for worse. And again, always trying to keep the foreground and background shifting just a little bit, always keep a sense of movement so that the house is living and breathing, even when it's quiet. It's never totally quiet. There's always a low bass sound that we keep going whenever inside here. Well, there's a lot of bitterness within Rob, and most of it from the lack of success with physical relationships. And, of course, we discover later what that's all about as well, and creating a sense of reality that doesn't really extend beyond the door of the Heiberger house. All of these lights were on master switches, and getting the flickering right is something is difficult to do. Normally you have this really fake sounding sound effect that they like to put in. And in reality, when lights flutter like that, it's what I said to the sound design people was, let's give it that sound. There's our cheap hand on the shoulder jump gag that I couldn't avoid. But it is a nice reveal of this unbelievably beautiful actress and character. But anyway, I wanted to get that fluttering moth sound of the flutter of the blinking lights. So what I was saying earlier about Claire is casting this role was incredibly difficult. She had to be beautiful and willing to be naked and vulnerable and not self-conscious about it, be entirely comfortable about it, or it would have played phony and played wrong and silly. She also had to be able to act. And she had to have a very natural look about her. We didn't want anyone who had obvious silicone implants. We didn't want anybody who was covered in makeup or required a lot of makeup to look great. Just someone who's almost unmade up at all. Her hair is just long and straight and natural. And physically, she, has to have a very almost perfect look, but not an airbrushed, not a Playboy Playmate look about her, but someone who's beautiful and real and irresistible. And she's a very, very sweet girl. And once in a while, her Memphis accent would pop out. And so we kept that at bay most of the time. Let's not talk about what pops out during these scenes. But and again, on camera during this sequence, we're dialing up the hot passion light as we're trying to entrance Rob Hannessy's character with the irresistible and vulnerable quality of Valerie. And part of that quality is she needs him, and Rob has never really had someone rely on him before. In a way, I kind of regret that I did not mix this sound cue, this music cue. It's very lush, and I was afraid it would be way too corny to give this kiss that huge climactic moment, but you either go for it or you don't. And I regret that I didn't just go full on with it with the mixing level. That shadow cast over her nether regions is electronic because it was just a little too obvious that we had a little modesty patch there for her sake. And so Lee Wilson to the rescue once again. So poor Tony Todd, he's a wonderful actor, and it's a great beast. And the original designs for him had giant horns and all kinds of real monster details and took it very far. They were really great designs, but after John Carpenter's episode Pro-Life, the demon there was so much that it kind of epitomized that kind of monster, the long ram's horns on its heads, that sort of thing. I wanted Othakai to be not only chilling and arresting, but also erotic. I mean, coated him with black makeup and a shine to it, and so there's always a fetid, hot, wet, erotic quality about him, as well as to her, who most of the time Valerie is covered in perspiration and as if in the throes of lovemaking, even when she's not.
It's a crawl space. What do you think? Hot water pipes, electrical wires.
So whenever you're looking up at Rob, that's the stage in close-up, and whenever you're looking down on these long hallways, that's the location. So the group is in the location here, and a couple of the shots of Rob were done on the location when he's talking down to them from above, but that close-up was actually done on the soundstage. And that one where you see multiple stories is obviously on the location as well. But it was very much a choice to shoot them separately, never put them together in the same camera shots. Keep them divided instead of doing over his shoulder down on them in the early stages, because he's not part of them. They are a group, he's an individual, and they never assimilate him into them because they couldn't. We're always shooting up at Rob, but we're shooting straight onto them or down onto them to keep them physically separated. The hotel we shot this in, and the scene we're looking at now is on the soundstage. But this hotel, it's very much, like I said, a halfway house sort of place for people who are really trying to do their best. But every time you walk down the hall, the smell of marijuana is roiling out of most of the apartments, not all. And there would be people, they loved us there. They were very welcoming, but there was one woman who was really, really pissed off that we were annoying them, because we would start early in the morning, and a lot of these people would not get up until quite late in the day. But one woman was just a total pain in the neck about it until we gave her $75. And then she was much more cooperative. But it's a very noisy neighborhood, and they are rebuilding right down the street. This giant old department store called Woodward's is being turned into luxury condos in Gastown. And it's a very expensive project. And it's taking months, and they're building that, so we had to work around all of that sound. It's a noisy location, inside and out, and people coming and going. But it was really surprisingly cooperative, and the people were really great there. And we used some of them as extras, and in the very beginning, one of the women who lived there, she's the one who's looking out the window with a cigarette when Rob first arrives. And it's time for a little action in the otherwise quiet and talky world of Heiberger House.
Behind my back. Was looking at my secret book.
You shouldn't have done that, Mr. Hennessy.
These films are very demanding photographically because we don't really have long schedules, we don't have big budgets, and you really have to pick and choose what your shots are going to be because the days are short. It may not seem that if you're working in one of the departments, but we always carry 2 cameras with us, sometimes more, but you can't always get the cameras to shoot interestingly from 2 angles at the same time, but we try. So you're really limited in the number of setups you can do. I don't really like to storyboard unless there are effects scenes that everybody needs to be involved in. So none of the dramatic storytelling parts were storyboarded. The very ending is storyboarded, but that's it. So it's really just a matter of getting a way to be able to use 2 cameras at the same time to get the coverage, or just one shot at a time. Feature style, and just try and get it in, because it's very important to us that Masters of Horror looks like a bunch of feature films rather than a bunch of episodes from a TV series, because these are all filmmakers who make movies, they don't make television shows.
It's you.
And here's another example of the theatrical lighting. You know, a lot of these effects are very, very simple in that someone just steps out of the shadows. You know, the first appearance of Othakai at the top of the stairs. Once again, that's a theme of the show, is the shadows of the imagination. The dark places of the imagination are what gives birth to these children of the imagination. You know, Othakai first comes out of the shadows and grabs her and pulls her back in. She steps out of the shadows here. Suddenly we dial up light out of the shadows, and here Othakai shows up in this place. This was always in Clive's treatment, even the line, "You spineless little man," and then ripping the spine out through his throat. So a little bit of a horrific splatter. Monster, ripped out spine, and a K&B dummy of Jonathan. So all of those things are incredibly time-consuming. And the black makeup on Tony Todd here for Othakai was not smear-proof. So every time there'd be a scene with Claire, a lot of that black makeup would end up on Claire Grant. Not as much as on Tony Todd, but he would go through 3 or 4 hours to be made up, or even more. But this scene, she was covered in black makeup after it was done. We'd have to go back and clean her up. Every time you have a makeup effects scene, it's very time-consuming. And in this case, we were constantly adding the petroleum jelly to shine him up, to get that glistening glow. And the dummy effect and the pulling the gut the spine out and all. This was the most challenging, to get the idea. The way it's written in the script was that Othakai lifts Valerie up and he penetrates her inch by inch by inch by inch. So we're constantly making the camera go up, making the characters drop down. When we're looking at Othakai, we're making his image move up. When we're looking at her, her image is moving down, so that the agony of ecstasy are shared in that, as well as the swelling music, which is, you know, I guess you could call music phallic if you want. In this case, it was intended to be that, you know, it's the swelling penetration music.
Sit.
And now it's back to more talk. But, you know, for me, talk is really important in storytelling if it's interesting talk. I want every scene to be entertaining as well as to just enlighten us on what's going on here. So in this case, I love Chris Lloyd's performance here, and Tyrone's really great here too. He bounces off him really well. But Chris has this great, washed-up, never-been artist, but still feels he's a great artist, and yet mocking the one thing he's ever done, and that's this book that Othakai, the Beast, was his book that was adapted into this crappy 1970s horror film. And I love the way the art department designed this poster and shows us Othakai clearly. He's a pitiful character, but really understands things better than anybody in the house of in the Heiberger house. It's interesting that Chris and I and Clive have now worked together on projects twice, and I hope to be able to do more of it. But he really responded. There are some very chewy dialogue sequences in Quicksilver Highway and in this, and that's really what Chris responded to. He really liked how his character was so verbal and how it was written in such a way that he's very comfortable with it. And when Chris is rehearsing, he goes through very straight. Everything goes, you know, very straight ahead. He has a lot of dialogue. It's very difficult because you do so many pages in a day. And scenes like this are just pure dialogue. Tyrone, not so bad, but Chris has some very major speeches here. And he had everything down perfectly, and then we'd start shooting, and he'd still have them all down, but he adds this element of Christopher Lloyd performance where it kind of stutters a little, because we wrote her that way, you know, and you think that he's nervous with the dialogue and that he's not going to make it and it's not going to come out. So I find myself clenching my teeth and gripping my palms, worried that he's not going to get all the way through the scene and we'll do more takes and the like. But it never happens. I mean, he just changes his performance quite a bit when the camera is rolling. It just has more of a tension to it. And it really, you know, it's Chris Lloyd. There's no other way to describe it, no other person who performs that. So now that the deaths are starting to rack up and Othakai is literally taking his pound of flesh, I like working from a very slow build-up to get you into who the people are, what the place is, what the story you think is being told. And then as things start to ramp up and clarify, try and make things move, bring a little more light into it. You know, I love the bright white light coming from outside, so you know you're in daytime, even though the hallways are so dingy and dark and dim. None of the lights are nearly as bright as the sunlight from outside there. And when you're in the heart of Heiberger House, the sounds starting to get out there and him confronting. Tyrone's character, Rob Hannessy, is so passive throughout. This is the first time he's really allowed himself out of his character. And this was a very, very crucial moment in the telling of this tale, because now we discover for the first time what the secret of Heiberger House is. These three people have written the story of Valerie on the Stairs, and it's 60 years of writers' imaginations, failed imaginations that have never been published, that have been sweated and bled into the walls of Heiberger House, and all of the energy, as he's explaining here, that this is the big moment. This was really a great time for Tyrone and for Rob Hannessy's character to bring us into it and to create a sort of dream logic that's very Barkerian, if you will. I mean, if you tell this story to someone, it is, of course, ludicrous. And so far as I know, you could not create human beings through the blood, sweat, and tears of the imaginations of writers. If they could, it would be great. Yes, you can create a movie or a television show and have actors portray those, but bringing them whole cloth out of the walls, well, obviously preposterous. But I think Clive, my challenge was to take what Clive does and take something completely outrageous and unreal and try to make it believable and to suck you into the story enough to go through the to believe it in just for an hour. And what's interesting here is, again, whenever Valerie appears or Othakai appears, we play with the theatrical light and play with shadows and in and out of shadows and the like. But when we do the reverse, you can actually see behind her that Othakai is already in the room, just being very still. We didn't really intend it that way, and we said if we had to, we can paint it out. But I like that the observant viewer, if he's really observant, can see Othakai watching what's going on here. Of course, being in the room, I enjoyed watching what was going on. But you can see him on the left side. He's behind her. But whenever we build the passion, we bring the light up, warmer and hotter and brighter and more passionate and more filled with the blood of passion, especially when we're dealing with guilt. But the passion between these two women, this woman who's never had a satisfactory relationship, helped create this most beautiful woman, this most desirable woman, so that she could share in her. And here she is, finally the culmination of their physical connection, and it can only lead to her death. But I thought Suki did a fantastic job in this scene. Everybody has one really standout, chewy scene to play with in this film, and I'm just very, very happy with how they acquitted themselves and committed themselves to it. You know, that there are things in here that are not easy for an actor to do. But in this case, and if you're looking behind her in some of those shots, well, now, of course, you're supposed to see him. Now, that was the first take of the claws ripping her open and the blood spraying out. I know it's very Asian movie kind of effect, and it was too much for me at first, and we did another take, and once we got in the cutting room, it just was the most potent. You know, it may not be the most realistic, but it was the most potent. One thing about this location, and again, we're on the soundstage here, but the location really stimulated so much of how we would shoot the film. And we had requested a bunch of extras, only about a half a dozen, 6 or 8 extras. And I'd requested from the extras casting people the most eccentric looking. I told them, watch The Tenant, just get people who are really strange looking, who look like they don't get out much.
You're next.
And, you know, a broad range of ages, but everyone should look a little quirky, a little unusual, so that we're not dealing with the norm. Well, we get there and there's these, you know, 25-year-olds with buzz cuts and just, they looked like very hip people you would see in a nightclub in downtown Vancouver or Los Angeles for that matter. And it really upset me. And so I had to ask for them to be replaced. And the people you see in the hallways, unfortunately, it's why some of those scenes only have the 3 actors in the hallway and not anyone else. There are a couple scenes where you see 4 or 5 extras in the background, but the reason, you know, and those they brought were really good, and I was very happy with them. But the ones earlier were just it's not they're bad extras. They were just totally wrong for our movie. And so I thought, you know, I've got to shoot, and I can't shoot with these people looking like they were right out of a nightclub. So we shot with the three actors playing the characters who wrote the book.
Patricia left off.
Again, here we are in this incredibly complicated speech that Chris has to give, and it just, I think he's so powerful in it. You know, it's not jokey. He's playing it straight. There are moments that are comical, but for the most part,
prostitutes past their cell date.
you know, he's just playing it so straight.
The lonely ones.
You fed them to your monster?
Oh, God, no.
So it starts getting more and more difficult. We shot close to in script order, but what was complicated was when we go through the walls and what comes up later. That was really difficult. But again, you know, it would have been tempting to cut to a close-up here, but his whole body language and everything is so important to what's going on here. And of course, he's a despicable piece of work. But, you know, Chris can hold this kind of shot so powerfully. Yes, we'll get into the faces, and their faces say a lot, but the bodies do too. And I like not cutting really heavily, especially during a dialogue sequence. If an actor is really giving an important and powerful performance, I think it's important that you play it out as much as you can without chopping every line or two.
They were all in my head. The life.
The whole idea of rehearsals is something that it's difficult. The concept of rehearsals on a show that's shot out of town, that's shot in Vancouver, with actors who come in from LA or from New York or from Toronto to come in. Like this group, 3 of them were out of Los Angeles, 1 just in from Toronto. And you can't bring them in too early because it's expensive and time-consuming, and they all have other jobs here and there. So you rarely get the opportunity to sit down and do a table read or even any rehearsal until you are on the set. So sometimes that's great. I don't like to pre-rehearse too much. I like to get the actors together and at a dinner or at the hotel or something, just talk about the characters and questions, and maybe just do some reading through of some scenes where actors have concerns or I have concerns about how best to approach it and what their backstory is, and I can be helpful as the screenwriter to be able to fill in some of the gaps. But I love when actors come in with ideas as well. But there's not much time to find that on the stage, and yet that's what you really have to do. So it becomes very complicated because sometimes you're already shooting for a few days before one of your actors even gets into town. So if you're lucky, you'll run into him at the Sutton Place Hotel where everybody stays before you get on the stage and be able to have some chats or talk on the phone or something. Now this, cheap shot. The old falling body. This is also on the stage. We actually built the wall from one side that we could break through and go into this stairwell. From the other side, you have the other stage where the other set of the whole room. So this only had the one side of the bedroom wall that we're coming through and then looking away from the bedroom and going in, and this eventually leads into Othakai's chamber. Again, this is getting complicated here. There were some things that worked and some things that didn't work. I think, again, I like having these quick, soundless 8mm shots of history to remind us of what the elements were. Now, originally, I had written and we shot her saying to Rob Hannessy, "You killed me," before she turned and takes a bite out of Chris Lloyd's neck and he bleeds to death. But it just seemed much more potent to keep it silent, just for her to look at him and exchange this look that incites his guilt and realizes he takes responsibility for her death, her being there. And you don't need her to say, "You killed me." This set was always intended to be something that was not artfully lit. It would be very basic, these light bulbs hanging down and being very practical light. and again, mostly darkness. But the stage was so beautifully built. David Fisher, our production designer, this was the last one that he designed before he left the show. Completely burned out from doing it all. But the Othakai's chamber was very important. And once we got there, this was intended to be shot in half a day. And the other half of the day was going to be in another location that was going to be the title sequence that I ended up, we went to another location, built up an apartment where Rob originally lived, and had it all ready to go and just didn't have time to shoot it, so we never shot that scene. And this was supposed to be a half a day shared with some other stuff. Well, it was just impossible. With the fire effects, with the battle that comes up here, with the makeup effects, with the gunfire, all of the stuff with Rob and with Valerie and with Othakai, the sequence was about twice as long, written twice as long as it is now. And I feel like we just barely got the scene as it is. So the extent of the fight, Jim Dunn, our stunt coordinator, went to great extremes to work out this great battle sequence and everything, and some of it was just too much for what the story that was being told. But I'm throwing stunts out left and right here just because we could never have done it. And this was an 11th day. This day was shot with a very limited crew, so it took even longer to get it done. But everything down below here was shot in one day with half of a crew, and it was our 11th day. So originally there was going to be battles where Rob is thrown against a wall and stunned and comes back to consciousness, and all of these things. There were bodies strung all about the Othakai's chamber, and all of these things that were to happen to Othakai, and it just had to be simplified. Everything had to be brought way down. Her being dragged and all of this, Rob was right there. He's just on the floor because we just couldn't get everything, we couldn't change the lighting enough, we couldn't change the stunts enough, and just keep it going. So this just feels like the very bare minimum of what we could do to make the sequence work. And fortunately, the actors were at the top of their game and helped that a lot. But all of this was very, very complicated. So we've got 2 handheld cameras, hopefully giving it even more energy to not have the formality of the dollies. Plus, we wouldn't be able to do it anyway. The stones on the floor would have slowed us way down, and we didn't want the feel of Steadicam in here. We wanted it much more immediate and much more intense and much more the romance of Othakai. This Shakespearean performance by Tony Todd here. And again, simplified. Gee, pretty easy to dispatch of this demon. He just gets thrown into the fire and he's gone. Well, I apologize for that, but we just didn't have time for the big battle. And now, we reuse some of the same camera setups. At the same time we have them run down, then we'd have them run back up while we're still rolling. So even though it takes place 5 minutes later in the story, it happened in the same shot at the same time. So there's a little movie magic, This took a lot of planning, a lot of conversations, a lot of design, discussions how best to make her dissipate so that when we discover that she is truly a figment of imaginations, that she dissipates once she is outside of Heiberger House, she's gone. Now Rob, his situation, and this is another scene that had pages torn out while I was shooting, our associate producer, Steve Best, who is assistant to all of the directors on each of the shows, he actually had a role as a cop in here. And we had cops come up. Well, I'll tell you about that later when it happens in the script. But at this point, we had a bunch of stuff, interplay between cops. And it just felt so TV and so tawdry, and I felt so foolish having written it that way. And the words just felt fake and phony and unbelievable. And most importantly, beside the point. This is Rob's story. Rob starts out outside of Heiberger House, just arriving at Heiberger House. But now when he discovered that he's also been written by these people, he is made up of text and pages. You know, those, we were trying to figure out how we could afford to do this effect. And those are tattoos. Those lines of text are tattooed on by the KNB gang. And then we slowly have the color of paper and parchment overtake his body. And that first peel off is an animation. And so this was an image that Clive had originally come up with in the treatment, the idea that he becomes the pages of text that wrote him in the first place. And so it was really difficult to come up with doing this on a television budget and doing the 3D animation where he actually becomes this image of fluttering pages, which we shot in slow motion and with the dissolves and everything. And it's really quite poetic, which seems only appropriate for a character who is written and is of the group imagination, the group mind, if you will. And then that last image, which is the last line of the book of Rob Hannessy. Bang. And so it came to pass that Rob Hannessy never became a published author. And there you have the story of Valerie on the Stairs. The title's typing off as well. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're enjoying the Masters of Horror series, and hope that there will be many more for you. Thanks a lot.